my name is Debbie from Sew What. Today I'm wanting to show you how to draw out a rectangle or a square onto fabric. Now I know that sounds pretty simple, but as you can see from this piece of fabric, which looks like it is a rectangle, it actually is not. If you hold the ruler up to this piece of fabric, I'm just aligning the long edge of the ruler with the long edge of this fabric. And you'll see that the top edge over here is slowly getting bigger towards this side. So you can see the eye deceives. So it's really easy once you know what the steps are to draw out a rectangle properly and not a rhombus that is leaning ever so slightly like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So that is what I'm going to be showing you today in 4 easy steps. So what we'll need today to draw out a rectangle or a square on fabric, we also call that squaring the fabric off, is you'll need a ruler. You can also use a short ruler if you only have a 30 centimeter ruler, no problem. But of course, the longer the ruler, the easier and the better it is. You'll need a square ruler, so a quilter's ruler, like that, or a nice big book that you know has a good corner on it and good 90 degrees that's secure. Then, of course, I really like to use the measuring tape for measuring, and of course the marking. So if you're drawing on a dark fabric like a black or a navy blue, I suggest you use a dressmaker's chalk, or you can even use the edge of a piece of soap. When drawing on any other colors, I really like to use the friction pen. A friction pen, once you've marked the fabric, you can simply iron off the markings when you're done. So these are the items that we'll need. I'm going to be using my longer ruler and my cornered ruler, the one with the 90 degrees. And on this fabric, I'll be using the blue friction pen to mark on the fabric. So let's begin. You first need to take a look on your fabric and decide and see where the selvage is. The selvage is the edge of the fabric that is naturally created as the fabric is woven. So it often has those little dots. It's where the pins go into the weaving machine, and the thread comes along and turns and then goes back in the other direction. So it creates an edge here that doesn't fray. Sometimes you'll also see that the printing goes not quite up to the edge. So that's the selvage, and on the opposite side of the fabric you'll also find the selvage. So that is where it is pulled across onto the weaving machine, onto the loom, and the top and the bottom is cut. So you'll find a selvage on the left, a selvage on the right, and you'll also find a cut edge at the bottom and a cut edge at the top. So that's the quantity that you've purchased in the shop when you measure along that selvage. So today I've got a piece of fabric I've already used for something else, so it's a bit jaggedy, but that's no problem at all. That's the whole point of this video, is to show you how to cut fabric out on the grain, or to how to square off your fabric. Usually you'll use patterns when you are making garments, but sometimes when you're making, for example, a drawstring bag or a zip bag or a cushion or a bag, a tote bag or something, you will need to draw out your squares or your rectangles. So as I was saying, you first find where your selvage is on your fabric. So we know that this is the selvage of my fabric. And what we'd like to do is, as the selvage gets a bit tight in the wash, we want to remove that selvage. We don't want to include it in our project. So the easiest way and the quickest way, a bit of a cheat, is if you don't mind wasting a little bit of fabric, you can just use the width of the ruler and you put that along the edge of the fabric. Make sure that you are really checking that it is aligned at the top and at the bottom, so that your one edge of your ruler is perfectly aligned with the selvage. You can then very carefully hold the ruler and softly draw that line. Now, of course, if you don't want to waste that little bit of fabric, you can simply use a narrower ruler, or you can measure a 2 centimeter at the bottom over here, make a mark, measure 2 centimeters at the top here, make a mark, and then take your ruler, place it on the markings and draw the line. But this is the easiest way and the quickest way. So once you have your vertical line, it doesn't really matter if it's your vertical or horizontal on your table. Just place the fabric in a way that easily fits on your table. Don't have any fabric falling off of the table. So you've drawn your, in this case, vertical line. And what we want to do now is we want to take that 90 degrees. We want to get a ruler, or as I said, a really tough, thick book that is sturdy and has a nice 90-degree corner. You then place that onto the fabric, and you see here I have a gap. So I don't want to move this down too low, because I don't want to be drawing a line along and then not catching this section. So I want to make sure that visually it's just above that. I'm going to focus on my first line. So make sure that your one side of your ruler is lined up carefully with the first line that you drew. Now that is really, really important. If you focus on this point, for example, here, but at the top it's not quite aligned, then when you draw the second line, you won't have a 90 degrees. So it is really important that you don't just focus here where you will be starting the horizontal line. You see what I'm doing? I'm putting my pen on that line and pushing the ruler up against it. And then over here, I'm doing the same and moving that and double checking. So I'm just double checking that that line is perfectly aligned with the edge of the ruler. And it's as simple as that. I now draw my second line here. Be careful not to move the ruler. And we have our 90 degrees there. So you can then take a nice long ruler if you have one, and you line the ruler up along this horizontal line. The idea is that we are extending this line. You don't want to use that ruler and eyeball this situation here to continue the line. I'm just going to move this up. So because this is a crooked line, it's essentially the line that was cut in the shop or on your previous project, but you don't want to eyeball that and guess to get that second line. Okay, you want to continue with this first line. So it's important that you put the ruler onto the first line, especially if you've got a nice long ruler. You can put more of the ruler onto the original line. Again, I put my pen onto the line and move my ruler exactly onto it, and I double check. And you can see now my fabric's nice and flat. It's not stretched at all. I've double checked that the ruler is on the original line, and I'm now going to extend that horizontal line. There we go. It's really important that the angle is correct, that you extend this line. If it is only a millimeter out over here, for example, then do you see how far the distance, how big the difference becomes as the line extends? So do spend extra time on that. Because our line is our basis of our sewing, you want your rectangle or your square to be a perfect rectangle or square. At this point, you now decide which size you want. So you look on your pattern or on your instructions of how big you need the rectangle or square to be. In this case, just for demonstration, I'm going to show you a 9-inch height and a 20, let's make that a bit shorter. Let's say 10 by 15, okay? So it doesn't matter where you start. Now that you've got your, I call them baselines, now that you've got your vertical and your horizontal and you're sure that they are 90 degrees to each other, you then start working with your measurements. So we have a 15-inch over here. That's the size that we'll be drawing our rectangle. And do you see that I'm not measuring from 0 and then trying to see where to mark the 15? It's a lot easier if you put the number onto the line. Make sure that the number is nice and straight, it's not skew. Make sure that that is really nicely aligned. I then hold that and flatten the fabric, move my hand along, and now I can draw a line along the top edge of the measuring tape. And of course we'll be doing that a second time, because if you put your ruler at that marking, you don't know where else the ruler needs to be. So we can't just have one marking. You always need 2 measurements to hold a ruler up. So if you have one measurement, you don't know how to put your ruler. If you've got 2 measurements, you can easily hold up the measurement, hold up the ruler. So you always need 2 measurements before you draw the line. So we're going to be taking that same measurement again. So we've measured 15 over here. We went from here, checked it, and made a mark, and we're going to do the same over here. It doesn't really matter where you do it, but you don't want to make many lines. You just simply want to have 2 lines that you can use for your ruler. So over here I'm going to be checking that the 15 is exactly on the line that I drew. I hold that measurement in place, and you extend or you push out the measuring tape. Do you see these little bumps? I'm not stretching the material, but I'm just flattening the material so that if there are any creases, it doesn't affect my measurement. So we've now got 2 markings so that we can draw a friend for that vertical line. And the 2 markings, I make sure, again, as I said before, you put your pen onto the marking, and then you can easily see how to line it up on the other marking over here. Double check, and you draw that line. Doesn't matter how high up you're drawing the line. There we go. So this baseline, the vertical baseline and the horizontal baseline, we draw first. We've now measured from this vertical baseline and we've drawn the friend for that vertical line. We're now going to focus on this horizontal baseline, and we're going to measure up twice from this line, and we're going to draw the last line. So we're going to be using 10 inches here. So 10 inches, you see that I've placed that very carefully so that it's not skew, but that the marking is exactly on the line. I then flatten the measuring tape and make a mark on the edge of the measuring tape. I repeat it again because we need 2 markings to be precise. So we've got our 2 markings. There's the other one, and we're going to draw that line. There we go. And so we can double check it just to show you. We've got that as 10, and that is perfectly 10 as well. Then we have 15 and 15. Now I would say that if your measurements are very, very long, you can simply, as I was saying, hold the measuring tape carefully and move your hands along the measuring tape and mark. Be sure not to move your hand and then before you mark it, you sort of, lifting your hands. Make sure that you're holding the measuring tape flat on the surface of the fabric until you make your mark. And that is how you are very precise, and you can easily draw a rectangle or a square on fabric, or you can simply square your fabric off ready to be neat and to draw your next item.